Good morning, Excellencies and all. I am happy to be present before you today in these chaotic times. I believe this demonstrates our common and continued commitment to our exchanges on human rights, including cultural rights. In that spirit, I was happy to meet during my stay in Geneva with several regional groups, as well as a number of states, to discuss substantive and substantial issues pertaining to my mandate. Those exchanges are always necessary for my mandate, and so I thank the state delegations that engaged with me. Today I have chosen to report to you on first my exchanges with states through the communication procedure, second my country visit to Chile, and finally my thematic report on the digitalization of cultural heritage. Ladies, gentlemen and all, during the past year, I led on or joined 74 communications about alleged violations of cultural rights in letters addressed to 29 countries and to 37 other actors, such as international organizations and private companies. I followed up on a number of cases, including for individuals sentenced to death for the exercise of artistic freedom. I would like to name here Mr. Tumad Shalehi in Iran and Mr. Yahya Sharif Aminu in Nigeria. I remain concerned about the fate of these persons. The work of the mandate has also focused this year on the right of everyone to participate in sports without discrimination. I expressed my concern to France, in particular, about women wearing the hijab that have been prohibited from participating in sports competitions. I am even more concerned now as the French Senate has recently adopted a bill expanding these bans for all sports associations. This gives me the opportunity to reiterate here the importance of respecting women's and girls' bodily autonomy and agency, as well as their free, informed choices, while firmly rejecting any form of coercion or imposed codes. The right to cultural heritage and to express one's cultural identity, including through language and religion, remains at the center of my mandate. Serbia's attempts to destroy parts of such cultural heritage without the appropriate consultation and participation has led to a communication to the state. Just as I renounced the possible destruction of the General Stab building as an attack on Serbia's historical and cultural memory, the students' protests sparked by the preventable deaths of 15 people in Novi Sad reflect a wider struggle to uphold accountability, transparency, and the right to participate in shaping the country's cultural and civic landscape. The persistent protests throughout highlight the crucial link about accountability and cultural rights. Their call for justice is also a fight for a society where open debate, artistic expression, and academic freedom are safeguarded. I have also engaged with the government of China regarding the situation in Tibet, in particular regarding the impacts of the construction of the Kamtok Gantro hydroelectric power plant. Other communications to other states also touched upon development projects and how they negatively impact cultural rights. Several issues of academic and scientific freedoms also arose during last year. Only 2 weeks ago, we had cancellations of events in university campuses in Germany relating to the genocide in Palestine. The fact that it was a talk by the UNSR on occupied Palestinian territory adds a more serious dimension to this. Academic freedom does not focus on protecting ideas that the state agrees with, but encourages informed debates about various ideas, including those contrary to the state and even the public opinion. It is up to the state to take measures to protect such voices, not to silence them. Dear delegates, last year I visited Chile. I want to congratulate Chile for its commitment to multilateralism and the constructive reactions to my visit and my opinions. Chile has already taken measures to implement some of my recommendations, which I really applaud. The recent shift in narrative in Chile from a focus on access to culture to democratizing culture and decentralizing decision-making is very promising. The creation of the Commission for Peace and Understanding is a positive step towards redressing past wrongs and creating a space for dialogue. Integrated and sustainable development of the country cannot be achieved if some parts of the society are not involved in the debates that define the values that development aims to fulfill. My main recommendation to Chile has been to focus more on the generic application of the right to participate in cultural life, both in law and practice, and to take specific and positive measures for everyone to exercise this right. Many public servants still believe that the protection of diverse cultural expressions and practices are a private matter and not a state obligation. The society needs to be educated on the scope and breadth of the state's obligations regarding cultural rights. My second firm recommendation is that now is the time for Chile to move from plans to actions in improving the effective implementation of cultural rights. So there should be a systematic training in public bodies on the importance of effective, bottom-up and meaningful participation. There should be clear campaigns and measures to destroy the existing hierarchies in the society that deprive people from real participation and to maintain respect for all cultural frameworks. I recognize the efforts that are being made for the eradication of discrimination of LGBTQI people, but machismo and specific structures continue to prevail in the country. All forms of cultural expression should be funded and promoted in an open and inclusive manner. And FPIC, free, prior and informed consent, not just the right to consultation and not a weak right to participation, should be recognized in matters that affect directly indigenous peoples and Afro-Chileans, as well as local populations. Development must not go ahead without the real involvement of the local population. But I want to finish by saying how impressed I have been with the women of Rapa Nui that I visited, who stood firm against attempts to use the transformational concept of culture to justify weaker sentences for recognized crimes and violations of some of their rights. I encourage the Council of Elders in Rapa Nui to publicly join them and affirm that the Rapa Nui culture today, as evolved, is also shaped by the values and activism of these women. In 2024, I also visited Lao, PDR. The rights of indigenous peoples and local population to decide on their future has been very prominent in my visit. My report will be submitted and discussed in the March 2026 session. Ladies and gentlemen, my thematic report today before you is about the digitalization of cultural heritage. Digital technologies can certainly bring critical added value for enhancing awareness and accessibility to cultural heritage for education, research, and employment purposes. However, digitalization can only bring long-lasting outcomes if it is human rights, if it goes according to a human rights approach. Cultural professionals, whether in the government, the administration, private companies, or non-governmental circles, must become more aware of the implications that the digitalization of cultural heritage has for cultural rights. I am concerned that in digitalizing cultural heritage, cultural rights are not taken into account. So instead of protecting the right to cultural heritage, digitalization often leads to further violations of cultural rights. So for being a possible solution, digitalization of cultural heritage becomes a problem. The right to cultural heritage for all has to be guaranteed in digitalization processes through state measures. Source communities, namely communities that consider themselves as the custodians or owners of a specific cultural heritage, people who are keeping cultural heritage alive and have taken responsibility for it, must be acknowledged as such, and the right to the specific cultural object or practice must be recognized. Communities should retain control of their cultural data and should be involved in further digitalization processes. Data sovereignty is a key issue here. This is key in preventing cultural misappropriation. Digitalization of cultural heritage cannot allow new digitalized cultural expressions that do not understand, do not respect, or honor the original cultural or historical significance. Which cultural forms to be digitalized must be chosen with the active and meaningful participation of the people whose heritage is digitalized. The interpretation, messages, and narratives of the digitalized forms must be driven by them, not the state, not the outside experts. Digitalized forms must not be used in ways that reinforce negative stereotypes, that disrespect sacred traditions, or dispossess or exclude the persons and groups related to that cultural expression from their use or their benefits. All these violations of cultural rights have to be prevented in digitalized processes. In essence, the report insists that contrary to what techs and private companies tell us every day, digitalization processes are not neutral activities. Artificial intelligence potential for cultural homogenization and maintaining biases is of significant concern, and it is up to the states who have undertaken an obligation to respect cultural rights to prevent this and deal with the issues. Ladies and gentlemen and all, in many respects, the intersection between copyright regimes and cultural rights poses several challenges that also have to be discussed and addressed. I have said several times from this podium that it is important to ensure that WIPO's work is consistent with cultural rights. Despite years of scholarship and interventions that acknowledge the problems, there still has been no real progress in addressing these contradictions and getting WIPO to deal with these issues in a cultural rights approach. UNESCO conventions also need to ensure that in protecting cultural heritage, the cultural rights for all are taken into account. The human rights standards, the cultural rights standards established within the UN context have to be infused in the interpretation of UNESCO instruments, policies and practices. Thank you very much.